Yes, I'd like to make a couple of comments. First of all, I'm looking forward to today's presentation and that Jason was willing to come back to us. I think the topic is going to be fascinating, particularly the new provision. And I'm just wondering, this is obviously only the beginning, and I wonder where ultimately that will go, whether we will eventually just have contact lenses with all the features that now require some true glasses. In any event, looking forward to our today's presentation, because all my life I've been an early innovator or early adapter, as people say now. That was one comment. Really looking forward to today's presentation. The other one is I would like to make our members and our audience aware of the fact that our summer pause is approaching pretty fast. We do stop making presentations in July and August. That doesn't mean we stop working as an organization. We do have a very active board, and our board is involved in something which will be of great importance to our membership. We are working on updating our website in a very major way, and key person doing that is our host today, Dan, who does an outstanding job. But this improved new website will move us forward to more integration, to more automation. We will have more details as time goes on. In a couple of weeks, we have another board meeting where we will hopefully put the final touches on that website. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be fascinating, and it's really going to benefit our members and the board as well, because it will reduce some of the workload. I just wanted our members to be aware of the fact that something is forthcoming. We want to prepare you well for that. Hopefully we will have some kind of a video guide that will show you what this new website will do and how to get involved in it. I just wanted to pass the word that something is going on and that we are progressing. So those are my comments, and back to you, Dan. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Eckert. All right, let's get to our presentation. We have with us Jason Snell, and he is going to be talking everything WWDC. So Jason, I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Yes, again, morning in the West Coast, morning in the East Coast still for a little bit. I am Jason Snell from sixcolors.com. I used to work at Macworld back in the day. It's been like 8 years now. It's been a while. And I was in Cupertino last week for several days, got to try the Vision Pro. I'm one of those. And so I want to talk to you about what got announced. I will pause at a couple of points if you've got any questions about what I've said. I've been giving this presentation this week to user groups, which is great. I love having a presentation that I can give multiple times. A lot of interest in Vision Pro, so I imagine that we'll talk a lot about that. But I do have some stuff about the Mac and about the new operating systems that we could talk about too. I love giving these presentations right after Apple has made done a big thing, and I've talked to people at Apple, and it's given time to percolate. It's a fun time. This is I keep saying the day of the WWDC keynote is kind of like New Year's Day in Apple world, because we are going to spend the next year looking at these operating systems, and it turns out in 6 months, somewhere in the I don't know, summer of Apple world, there will be a headset too. So let me start with the Vision Pro. You've seen the headlines, $34.99 price, which took us all by surprise, available early next year in the US. Let me tell you a little about what it is, especially having gotten my hands on it. It's it weighs about a pound, which on one, compared to a Mac seems light, but you have to put it on your head, you have to put it on your face, and so there are some balance issues there. I'll talk about how they're sort of like putting it on your face and how that works. It's packed with technology, though. The front part of this thing is this curved glass and aluminum object, and it is maybe the most densely packed piece of computing hardware I've ever seen, I've ever held. What's in there? So there are 3 different OLED displays on this thing. There are 2 greater than 4K resolution displays on the inside to look into your eyes. That is, they're teeny tiny, and then there's a lens that kind of like guides the light to get it to be the right light to enter your eye and make it feel like it's coming from reality. The density of those displays, built by Sony, is 64 times the density of the pixels on your iPhone, which is already a pretty high density display. But there's the third display that was a little bit surprising, this front display that shows your eyes, or I should say, it shows a representation of your eyes that it's generating, because one of the things that the Vision Pro does is it generates kind of a simulation of you. They call it a digital persona, and they scan your face like Face ID basically, and they build a 3D model of you, and then using its sensors it can see all of your expressions inside and outside of the Vision Pro, and it uses that to build a sort of a digital model. What gets displayed on that front display is the eye portion, and the intent is for it to be an optical illusion to make it look like people on the outside can sort of see through transparently to your eyes, even though that's not actually what's happening. And in order to have this effect, this illusion be more realistic, Apple said specifically that they couldn't just put a display on the front with a picture of your eyes, because it might look realistic from a single viewpoint, but if you got off axis at all, it would look fake, because it would still be a display, a flat display. So what they did is they built something called a lenticular display. And the idea here, if you've ever had, like, I used to get baseball cards that did this, or there's like DVD boxes, and there are other things that it's that material that's slightly ridged. And if you move around or turn the card, it looks like something is moving or changing its image. It's the idea there is there are multiple images that are viewed from different perspectives. They've done that with this this front-facing eyesight, they call it, display, where if you're looking at it head on, it looks like you're looking at it head on. But if you're looking at it off axis, it looks like you're looking at it off axis. They actually are rendering multiple perspectives on that display and using the lenticular effect to give you the right one depending on where you're looking. It's a lot of effort for a display that the user of the device never sees, which is interesting. And I think it says a lot about Apple's philosophy here that I'll talk about in a minute. But I want to talk about the rest of the hardware, because why is it $34.99? These are the reasons why in a lot of cases. It's got 12 cameras in it as well. It has 5 sensors, including a LiDAR sensor in true depth. It has 6 microphones. It has 2 spatial audio pods, which are basically little tiny speakers that sit right above your ears. They don't block the sound going in your ears, because part of the point of this whole product is augmented reality. The idea that you can hear everything in your surroundings and everything that's in the virtual world overlaid on your surroundings is also making sound at the same time, as if that they're all happening together. That's sort of the illusion they're trying to create in terms of audio. In addition, they have an M2 processor in here, like is in a MacBook Air. There's also a new R1 processor, which is this reality-based or real-time based processor and operating system layer. Apple hasn't ever done anything like this before, although apparently they were working on it in their car project as well. The key, this gets used in automotive applications a lot, and if you've ever, all of us have used a computer at some point where it has a hiccup and it pauses and you don't know why, and then an application crashes or something like that. And you can't have that if you're running a car. Maybe the car entertainment system, but you can't have it in the software that is running the car that is like controlling the brakes. It can't happen. You can't have a pause like that. And so real-time operating systems are very much constructed to always work. If something goes wrong with a piece of software, they just move ahead. They plow ahead. They don't wait. And Apple's using that on this headset so that even if there's a software problem in a particular app, particular framework, it doesn't mean that you look to the left and your view doesn't change, because it breaks the illusion entirely, probably makes you a little seasick. It's not good. So they built a whole processor, which is, again, Apple's competitors are very unlikely to build their own custom designed processors for pieces of a VR headset, but Apple has the power to do that. And they've built that into this thing as well. So lots of hardware in that front part. It's contrasted by the back part, because I think I was struck by how the headband is this really soft, almost pillowy woven fabric. It's very high quality. And that is the band that goes back around the back of your head. There's also another fabric band that you can put on the top of your head and sort of Velcro it over in order to try and balance all the weight around it. Now, there's another piece to this, and this is one of the issues that I had, is the additional piece right behind the hardware is called the light seal. And it's basically a fabric piece. It's a non-technological piece that goes between your face and the hardware itself. And the idea there is this is where the contact happens, and they want it to be soft, and they want it to fit right, and they want to spread the force of having a pound on your head around from the back and the top and the front. And right now, Apple says they only have a handful of sizes of that, and that at launch in next year, they will have many, many more. I used it for about half an hour, and my forehead kind of hurt the whole time, but I don't think I had it adjusted right. And I also suspect that maybe they just didn't have the right light seal fit for me. If you're wondering how complex that will be, it sounds a little like Apple Watch bands, right? Where you've got to do a measurement and all of that, except this is about your head. And how do you do that? Apple actually is building into the Apple Store app a scan. And I underwent this last week. It's basically a Face ID scan. It uses the LiDAR sensor on a phone to do a Face ID, or the IR, it's the IR emitters on a phone to do a depth scan of your face. And then it uses that data to pick the right size for you. So you could either do that in a store, or you could even do that if you were buying it online. The other thing I had to have happen is they had to measure my glasses prescription. And the way that will work is that because glasses are a medical device, you will need to have your glasses prescription, and you will probably need to order these little magnetic snap-in lens adjusters from a third party. That's actually what I had to do from for my Meta Quest 2 headset. Is I actually had to go to an online partner of Meta that would make those for me because of actually like regulations, medical regulations in the United States. That may also be a reason why this thing is going to be in the US first, is that there's actually a regulatory connection here for about the half of people who Apple expects will need some sort of vision correction in order to use this thing. There is also an external battery pack. One of the decisions Apple made was not to make it heavier than it already is by putting a battery on it. So there's a very nice braided cable that comes out of a magnetic attachment that is up on the side of it. It is about the size of, I would say it reminded me of just an iPhone battery pack that you might carry around to charge your devices with. You can put it in a pocket. You can just put it next to you. And if you want to tether and run for longer than a couple of hours, which is the rated battery life, you just plug USB-C into the battery and you get this sort of system. I imagine that while it's powering the system, it can also recharge the battery, at least to a certain extent. And then you can just sort of, I guess, use it forever or until your face hurts and you need to take it off. We'll see how that goes. Okay, but I want to talk about, like, Apple is not always about hardware, right? Apple has a lot of strength in building hardware. We all know it. But the magic, I think, with Apple is that Apple also has the software part, and Apple builds their hardware and their software tightly together. And one of the big stories about this thing is Vision OS. So it's not just the Vision Pro, it's Vision OS. And Vision OS is a new software platform. It is a new operating system that is going to run alongside Mac OS, iOS, iPad OS, Watch OS, etc. And it is reminiscent of iOS in a lot of ways. It's reminiscent of Mac OS in a few ways. And it's very impressive. I have to say it. I was very impressed by it when I used it. To set it up the device, you turn it on, and it first it actually adjusts. It's got a little mechanical adjustment. It auto adjusts your interpupillary distance, which is the distance between your eyes. It does that automatically. And then you follow a dot around on screen. It's sort of like an inside out version of the Face ID training. You hold your head still and watch the dot move around. And what it's doing is it's scanning your eye with infrared dots in order to calibrate its own eye tracking, which is an incredibly important part of this whole process. Then you hold up your hands and it scans them, and that's for hand tracking, another incredibly important part. It says something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was hilarious. It's something like, hand scanning completed or something. And I thought, we're doing hand scanning now, but that's what it does. And then that moment happens where Vision OS, when it's ready to go, does not do what all of the other VR headsets do, which is drop you into a virtual world. It drops you into where you are. The first thing you see after you calibrate this thing is what you just saw before you put it on. You see your surroundings. There's no other overlay. There's no floating anything. It's literally just your surroundings. And that is part of Apple's philosophy here, is they built a product that is essentially a full virtual reality product, but they want to tell you that the default is augmented reality. The default is showing you the world around you and then adding things to it. Because I think Apple is trying to be very sensitive to the idea that these products necessarily entirely cut you off from the world, and they want to say no, that they don't. They can if you want them to, but that's not the default. Which I think is a very interesting philosophical decision on Apple's part that they've taken, and you see it all throughout, including the eyesight images on the front of the device. They're trying to. The way that works, I'll explain this now. The way that works is you only see the eyes when you're looking out. So the idea is to communicate to people on the outside who are looking at you that you can see them. If you can't see them, it doesn't show the eyes. It shows just kind of like a little color thing, sort of like the top of a HomePod, little color wash that happens there. Another interesting little quirk is if you're in an immersive view where you can't see your surroundings and somebody walks up to you and is looking at you, the sensors on the outside of the device detect that, and they allow that person's image to break through, and it's like they're stepping through the mist into your perception. And at that point, the eyesight will turn on as well, so they can see that they now see you. So Apple's tried to spend a lot of effort, a lot of money on making this not as isolating as you might think it would be or could be, or that other products are. And then how do you leave reality behind? Well, there's a digital crown above your right eye, and if you turn it clockwise, I believe, it basically like starts to drop you out of reality, and it starts to sort of like your field of view gets immersive into like some other place, but you can look behind you and you're sort of at 180 degrees, and you keep dialing it and it will eventually encircle you, and then you're in a completely virtual space. But it's sort of your decision to do that, which I think is very clever. So you're sitting looking at the room around you, and what do you do? Because there's, like I said, there's no overlay. I imagine you'll be able to give a voice command, but what they had me do was press the digital crown, at which point an app window comes up, essentially a bunch of little circles floating in front of me with individual apps on them. And that gets to the question of how do you interact with this thing? A lot of VR devices work where you've got either your finger or some controllers, and they like project kind of like a laser beam at whatever you want to point at, and then you click. Obviously, we have pointers on the Mac. The pointer is driven by a mouse or a trackpad. We have our fingers on iOS and iPadOS that do the pointing. This took me a minute to get, but once I got it, it was pretty spectacular. The pointer on visionOS is your gaze. The pointer on visionOS is literally whatever you're looking at. And the precision is remarkable. It feels much more precise than your fingertip, which is a fairly large touch target. It's a very small, precise area. And according to Apple, you know, they're tracking your eye. They're able to figure out where you're looking at. There's some machine learning involved there in terms of sort of if the sensors are a little fuzzy, they make they do some machine learning models to make their best guess about what you're looking at. And I will tell you, it was flawless when I used it. This is a product 6 months away from shipping. The gaze pointer thing was flawless. There's no pointer on screen. You will get, it's a little like Apple TV, or if you've used trackpad mode on an iPad, there's that concept of like when you're over something that it kind of lifts and shows a little more, or maybe highlights or the color changes a little bit to indicate that you're selecting it. It's currently the thing that's selected. That effect does happen on things that you look at, to give you a little indicator that it knows that you're looking at them. But nothing happens until you click. Now you can technically click by reaching out toward that thing that's in the distance and tapping it with your finger, and it will do that, but you're not really encouraged to do that. The visionOS sensor stack includes sensors all around you. It can see into your lap. It can see your hands on your lap. So you don't even have to reach out in front. You can just be sitting with your hand in your lap, and to click, you put your thumb and your index finger together, and that's it. And once you get that, Everything else kind of follows. It's very natural. I was looking at a window. It had a closed box. It's a little circle down at the bottom of the window next to a little drag handle, which is a little horizontal line that looks kind of like the line at the bottom of an iPhone that you use to flip up to the home screen or to unlock. I was able to just glance at the circle, which is a fairly small circle, and do this, and the window just disappeared. And I was able to scroll a web page by looking at the web page and putting my fingers together and moving them up to scroll the window in front of me. It's not direct interaction like an iPhone or an iPad, but it feels like it. It's almost like direct action at a distance. It's like you've got magic powers and there's a shortcut. You don't need to reach out. It knows what you want to move and then you move it. And swiping is the same way. It's just left or right. So I could not have been more impressed with the user interface. It feels natural, even though it's a little bit different. The idea that you're controlling whatever you're looking at is remarkable. I did not have a drag and drop experience. My friend Mike Hurley described the drag and drop experience as they looked at a picture, put his fingers together, looked over at a messages window and let go, and he was dragging and dropping with his eyes. I didn't experience that. I think that also, I'm not sure if the final interaction might not be, literally that you would look at it, put your fingers together, and then just drag it with your hand over. I'm not quite sure what the final interaction will be, but it is that simple. And in fact, my favorite gesture in the whole thing is that little window control bar that I said is at the bottom. There was nothing more visceral, more tactile, even though there's no tactile element of this except me pressing my own finger, than looking at that little bar at the bottom of a window and grabbing it with my fingers. And then once I had it in my hand and it really felt like I had that window in my hand, I could move it anywhere in the space. I can move it over there, put it a little higher, push it a little further back, or bring it a little closer to me. And then when I had it where I wanted it, you just let go and it stays there. It felt completely natural. And that was the one that really has stuck with me, as the idea that you're in a 3D space and there are windows around you and you literally can just grab them and put them where you want. There's no mediation there. There's no click with a pointer on the window or grab the title bar. You literally just grab the handle at the bottom and stick it somewhere. It's pretty remarkable. And all, again, using your gaze as the selection. The way the interface works, it is kind of like a Mac or kind of like an iPad. There's a shared space where apps run together. So by default, you're in a room and you've got a bunch of different windows, and they can be, you can have a virtual Mac window. You look at your Mac and a 4K display pops up above it. You can also run apps. It'll run iPad apps and iPhone apps by default. There can also be Vision OS apps. And by default, they all kind of run in one space. It's your shared space. But there's essentially a full screen mode, which is a not shared space. An app can open where it kind of clears out everything else. You're still in your own room, in your own place. But instead of having other app windows, one app can kind of take control and say, it's all my windows. And then there is the third mode, which is immersive, which is an app. And games will do this, right? Which is an app will just say, no, I'm going to not even show your world. I'm going to control everything around you and make a new world around you. And so there are those gradations between sort of multitasking and, full screen mode, where it's like all one app, and then completely immersive. So my personal experience, so I did use this. I used this for about half an hour. It was a whole process. I come in, they scan my face, they scan my glasses. I sit in something that sort of resembles an airport lounge or something like that. And eventually I'm called into a room where there are two Apple employees and the headset, and they put it on. They've put in the lens adjustments, and then I've spent time with it. The hardware is incredibly impressive, and the software and interface design are incredibly impressive. You can tell that some of Apple's best people have spent like the last 5 or 7 years working on this thing. It is incredibly polished, especially for a product that is 6 months away from shipping. Now, I will say, they didn't show me anything that wasn't polished. So presumably there's lots of stuff that isn't polished, and they don't want anybody to talk about that. So they didn't show it to me. It's a completely controlled demo. But what I saw, I thought that the polish and the functionality was remarkable. And I think that it's going to be a product that's going to be hard for anybody else to match, because it's using all of Apple's skills. Apple skills as a platform developer and an interface designer and a hardware designer and a chip designer and and creating materials. The Apple Watch especially has taught them a lot about working with different materials to make this thing And it is a really remarkable product. Now, I have seen a lot of conversation about this product, and I feel like there are actually two stories here, and sometimes they get commingled in a way that I would advise people to not do, because I think they're two separate stories. One is, how is this as a product? And like I said, I think it's really remarkable, even though I've only seen part of it and we're 6 months away from it shipping. I think it is it feels to me like it's one of the best things that Apple's ever made. It's an incredible technical achievement. The second story to talk about is, who wants this? What's it for? What about that price? Who's going to buy it at that price? Will the price come down eventually? Are people going to want to buy one of these, or is this a category that nobody really wants? The business aspect of it, the sales aspect of it, and I first off, I don't think anybody actually knows the answer. And if somebody says it'll definitely be a flop or it'll definitely be a success, they're just, it's a hot take. They don't know. No, none of us know. A lot of us are thinking about it a lot, and I'm not convinced that this is going to be a business success for Apple, but I also want to celebrate the fact that, at least from what I've seen, this is going to be a technological triumph for Apple. It's a pretty remarkable thing. The question is, do people want that thing? And I think that that's perfectly legitimate to ask that question. And I think the jury is still out on that. I will say, I think Apple's playing a very long game here. I think that they are thinking years and years and years ahead. They were patient enough to wait 5 to 7 years to ship this thing. I think that they believe that there's something in this category that's going to appeal to people. I think that they probably think that a successor to this product is the biggest threat that exists to the iPhone. And if the iPhone's going to get replaced, Apple's going to be the ones to do it. I think they also feel like the only way to progress this field is to ship something and see what happens. They're going to learn a lot. The technology is going to advance, and we'll see where it goes. So I think Apple is not going to shoot this out there, and then if people are like, yeah, it's too expensive, I'm not going to buy one, that they give up and go, oh well, we gave it our best. I think they're going to be doing this for years and pushing this forward. They've already invested so much in it, and I think they believe that there's something here. But we'll have to see what Apple's commitment is, and we'll have to see. I think there are probably use cases for this that will be discovered that will make people want to buy them. I should also say they're not going to be able to sell very many of these. One of the reasons it's priced at $34.99 is it sounds like Sony is only going to be able to make 700,000 or 800,000 of those displays, which means 300,000 or 400,000 Vision Pros a year at most. So in the short term, they kind of have to be expensive because. And I suspect even at that price, they will sell every one that they make because they can't make very many of them. So even with the production, this is so early on that Apple knows this is going to have to be a long game. If they could sell 10 million of them, they couldn't make anywhere near 10 million of them. So they know what kind of game they're playing here. But as a piece of technology, having spent half an hour with it, could not have been more impressed with that part of it. It really is. It really shows, I think, some of Apple's best skills, and clearly that they have been working very hard to polish this thing behind the scenes for years. And, we're used to the pace of annual operating system development, and I can talk about that in a little bit. New version of iOS, new version of iPadOS, and we see sort of the space of, what can Apple do in a year? How does Apple move each one of its platforms forward over the course of a year? To have something like this dropped on you, it's fascinating because it's very clearly 5 to 7 years worth of work. It's not something that they came up with, 2 years ago and put into practice. This is an enormous undertaking for them to create this new operating system, and it does not feel weird or wonky in any way that I anticipated it to be. Instead, it just sort of did everything that I thought it would do, and it was pretty remarkable. So with that, I am done talking about the Vision Pro after 25 minutes. Questions? Okay. How should we do questions? There are some in the chat. I don't know if we want to do those.
We can do. Yeah, we can do a couple of them. Okay. Actually, my question is first because as you were talking, I thought about gaming. Gaming is huge right now. Do you think that this is something that can be used for gaming?
It's absolutely capable of doing gaming in immersive mode. It's absolutely a use case. I think it's telling that Apple only showed gaming in a very particular weird context of an iPad game that you played with a game controller, or a Mac game excuse me, that you play with a game controller, because that's not what people use these for. But I think that's a choice that Apple made. I think Apple wants to differentiate itself from the competition. And I think Apple actually has some fear that these devices are thought of as only being good for games and only being appealing to a narrow slice of the game market. So like Apple knows that this thing is going to be able to do games, and it will. But I think Apple doesn't want to talk about that right now. And I would extend that. There are lots of categories of things that I think this thing is going to be able to do when it ships that Apple just didn't show or didn't talk about, because part of this, because this product isn't going to come out for a while and nobody knows anything about it, Apple gets to make a first impression and emphasize specifically the parts of it that they think they want, they want to be judged by. And so the showing the eye thing, which none of us saw, by the way, that is not a feature that actually exists right now in a way that Apple thinks is good enough to show to the public. So they showed it in their videos, but none of us saw it. So that's a good example of that. They only showed FaceTime with the digital persona, when most of us assume that they'll also let you just use an emoji, which would be a little less, in my opinion, uncanny. So there's a lot of stuff that has gone unsaid here, including games, but I have no doubt that games will be there. The only caveat I'll give is that by relying on hand tracking, Apple probably is limiting the games that will be able to be played on it, because some games require a level potentially of precision that you get when you're using something like a MetaQuest or a PSVR, and you've got a controller in your hand so that it knows precisely sort of like how you're doing everything. And I'm not sure all those specific levels of detail and having buttons on them is something that Apple's hand detection is going to be able to do. That said, I mean, I think I think somebody will make controllers for it, maybe multiple people. There'll probably be even a program where Apple says, here's how you make a controller for this thing for games. But again, I don't think they wanted to talk about it last week. I think they want that to be like a conversation for another time. So I think it will be there, but they don't want to talk about it right now.
Okay, Bob Hill, can you unmute yourself? And Jeff, you're after Bob.
Thank you, Sheeta, and thank you, Jason. For the acoustic coupling or interface, is there any discussion you've heard about that? And the reason for the question is, obviously, a lot has been done with the EarPods Pro to create various capabilities of directional interpretation. And Sony, of course, has been very active in this field. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, a few things. So I didn't mention it, but actually they do the same thing that they have you do for AirPods, which is they have you scan your ears, and they do have a model that they apply based on that. And you can use it without it, but they say that it makes a little bit of a difference. What they're trying to do, so I think it's a two-pronged approach here. With the audio pods that are above your ears, what they're trying to do is create this sort of like overlay. It's augmented reality for sound, which is you can hear the world around you and you hear what's coming from the device. And an example of, and they want to create an illusion. So the example I'll give you is I did a FaceTime call in the demo with a person. And we moved her window to the left. So she was coming from the left. And when I looked at her, she was coming straight forward. It's spatial audio that Apple's been working on. By the way, if you ever wondered, why is Apple so focused on spatial audio? Vision Pro is the answer, clearly. So they've got all this stuff that they're doing with spatial audio, but it's more than just that. So we were in a small room, and there was room tone and an echo. There was an echo in the room. When the person I was talking to on FaceTime spoke, she had the same echo. So they were actually introducing the room characteristics into her audio so that coming from those pods above my ears, it was as if she was in the room with me. Where if you could imagine it, if everybody else speaks with an echo and the person you're talking to on FaceTime doesn't, they're not part of the room. They're not part of the illusion, and they wanted to do that. I asked them if I did that FaceTime call outside, would I have heard the echo? And they said absolutely not. The echo is there because we're trying to put that person in your space. So there's a lot of sophisticated stuff going on here. That said, these are open, so if somebody's sitting right next to you, they will hear sound coming out of them. It's not super loud, but it's loud enough because it's not bone conduction or something like that. It's literally just playing sound down into your ears. and AirPods Pro are supported, and AirPods are supported. So in fact, Apple even said if you're on an airplane, these things are not going to be loud enough for you to hear anything. If you're watching a movie, you're going to want to put in AirPods and turn on noise canceling. So that's the other piece of this, is if you want it's essentially if you want the immersive sound of not being in your space, you probably are going to want to put AirPods in, unless you're in a quiet space. But so they thought of a lot of audio stuff. They are trying it, and you see it. In fact, I would say in its other products that do spatial audio, you're seeing a precursor of what's in the Vision Pro, and AirPods will definitely work with the Vision Pro.
Thank you. Jeff, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yes. Hi, Jason. I'm curious to know if you experienced any nausea while using these headsets, because I'm particularly susceptible to that. And I know that has to do with refresh rate and the pixel density. And I wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it sounds like from the people I've talked to from research, the people get nausea from these things because of a combination of field of view, pixel density, frame rate, and lag. So those are the factors here. I believe, what Apple has said is that their whole goal here is to eliminate all of those issues so that everybody can use it. I have used headset products that have made me a little queasy. I am actually a little prone to motion sickness. Put me on a Disneyland ride, and Florida, Disney World. I've never been to Disney World. I've only been to Disneyland, California. But anyway, put me on a Disney ride and one of those motion rides. I get a little queasy. In using the MetaQuest 2, I never really felt it, so I'm obviously not super sensitive to it. I only used this thing for half an hour, and it was in a pretty controlled space. I will tell you, though, I didn't have tunnel vision. It felt like I was seeing into my periphery. There didn't appear to be any lag. The screen is refreshing at 90 frames a second. It is a very high refresh rate. So I think Apple has done all that it can to make the experience so good and so high level that it will be, I don't want to say it won't make people sick, but I would say it is the least likely of all these devices to make someone sick. I'm sure there will be outliers, but they've tried really hard. I mean, they are not saying, well, if you can't handle a little lag, they have tried to reduce lag and increase frame rate everywhere. It's one of the reasons why they have the real-time chip and the real-time operating system layer, is they really want to make it feel completely smooth so that people don't get queasy or feel weird about it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jason, all yours.
Okay. And there'll be hopefully some time at the end. That's up to you, but I want to talk about the Mac a little bit just because I'm a Mac person from way back and I got excited about the Mac announcements, even though they were, I mean, what did they announce? They announced a price cut, a new model, another new model, a new chip, another new model, the end of the Apple Silicon transition, and it took them 12 minutes. I sort of feel bad, they could have done this in a different event a week or two before or after and let the Mac have its time in the sun, but they didn't. I think that it's great announcements, though. I actually think that one of the stealth great announcements of the whole thing is that they cut that price of the MacBook Air base model, the M2 MacBook Air base model, to $1099. When it came out last year at $1199, I think a lot of us were disappointed that it was not closer to the $999 ideal, I guess, of a MacBook Air price. But it's a lot closer now. It's $1099. And that's Apple's, I would not have guessed that Apple would have cut the price in a time of inflation of its most popular Mac, but it did. It did. And in addition to that, it announced the $1299 15-inch MacBook Air. So now you've got a much larger MacBook Air. And a lot of us Mac users have gone through this thing where you're like, I'd like a bigger screen, but to get a bigger screen, I really need to get a MacBook Pro. The 16-inch MacBook Pro costs what? $1,200, and it's got a lot of great features in it. But if all you wanted was a bigger screen, $1,200 is a lot to ask. And this is a very 15-inch laptops is an incredibly popular category on the PC side. I think Apple very clearly thinks that there's an opportunity for it to pick up a bunch of switchers, especially people who use iPhones already, and get them to come over to the Mac as well with the 15-inch Air. I think the bigger question is, why did it take them so long? And I think they were just distracted with other stuff, with the Apple Silicon transition and COVID and factory shutdowns and the supply chain issues with the chips. And there was a lot going on, but this product is a natural. I have one in front of me. It is literally just the M2 13-inch Air, but bigger. It's got a bigger screen. It's a 15.3-inch screen. Otherwise, performance-wise, it's the same. Battery life, it's the same. It is, and I think the M2 13-inch Air is a fantastic. I bought one, right? I reviewed it and then I went out and I bought one because I think it's so good. And now there's a 15-inch option, and they're otherwise identical. In fact, a little quirk of this, to get to $1099, just as it was with the $1199 model last year, that 13-inch Air, the base model is lacking stuff that's in all the other models. So it's got 2 fewer GPUs. It's got a cheaper adapter, power adapter. They've sort of like reduced stuff to get it down to that price. The 15-inch model does not, the base model does not have those limitations. And what that means is identically configured 13 and 15-inch Airs are $100 apart in price, not $200. So really you're paying, unless you're buying that base model with all the sort of like reduced functionality in order to get it down to $1099, the difference in to get the bigger model is $100, which is also, I think, pretty great. So I think it's going to be a hit. I think these are going to be the 2 best-selling Macs going forward, 13 and 15-inch Air. I love it. It's great. And it's out now. I believe people who ordered them last week are getting them now. The other side of it, on the other side of the product line, is Mac Studio and Mac Pro. I'm a big fan of the Mac Studio. I bought one last year with M1 Max. Now that they have M2 Max and M2 Ultra. M2 Ultra chip had not been announced before last week. What it is, if you don't remember, it's 2 M2 Maxes joined together with a little thing that they call their Fusion architecture. The way it works is it basically is double everything. I mean, it literally is just, it's 2 and they work together as 1. And so you've got twice the RAM and twice the cores and twice the CPU, GPU cores, CPU cores, lanes for input output. So more Thunderbolt ports, like that's what it is. Just like it was with the M1, it is with the M2 Ultra. A couple points here that I wanted to make. One is, although there is a Mac Pro that's very expensive, it's got a lot of slots. The slots can't be used for RAM or graphics expansion, but according to Apple, they get used a lot for I/O. It's for storage, it's for super fast networking and professional environments, and there are these cards that cost $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 each that are used so that like video pros can consume multiple streams of 8K video at once, or that audio people can do things like record from dozens of microphones coming in an orchestra. And there are applications that used to take sort of like 3 Macs chained together that you can just do on 1 Mac now with all those cards in there. But the point I wanted to make is almost nobody needs those cards. Almost nobody. And there was definitely a portion of the Mac Pro audience that bought the Mac Pro because it was the fastest Mac Pro you could buy, or fastest Mac you could buy. And I'm here to tell you the great news, which is the M2 Ultra Mac Studio is just as fast as the Mac Pro. They're identical, because an M2, what we learned about Apple Silicon is the chip determines everything. So an M2 Ultra Mac Studio and an M2 Ultra Mac Pro, if you're measuring their processor speed, memory bandwidth, all of those things, identical. They're identical. They are exactly the same, which means if you want the fastest Mac money can buy, you don't have to spend as much money because you don't need to buy the Mac Pro. You can buy the Mac Studio and it will do the job. I think that's really cool. Most people will not need an M2 Ultra. M2 Max is great. And that brings me to my second point, which is Apple, after a long time of having it be kind of confused, has finally got its compact desktop Mac story in order. If you have an external display and want a Mac, you can choose the M2 Mac Mini, the M2 Pro Mac Mini, the M2 Max Mac Studio or the M2 Ultra Mac Studio. There's a compact Mac with all 4 of Apple's different chip variations. They go up in price. You can sort of select the one that fits your budget and your needs in terms of CPU power and put it on your desk or under your desk. It's what I do for the Mac Studio. It's mounted under my desk, attached to a monitor, and you're good. So I think it's great that they've gotten there, and that the Mac Studio is still at least co-champ with the Mac Pro as the fastest Mac around. And very quickly, I want to talk about the new operating systems. Normally, that would have been the bulk of what I would talk about, but other stuff happened. I just want to list some things that are happening across all of Apple's operating systems this fall when these come out. The betas are out now for developers, and there'll be a public beta release in July. Use at your own risk, but usually they're usable. But even if you wait till fall, widgets are going to add more interactivity. They're not just going to be pretty. You're going to be able to tap on them and do things. They expanded their password manager, which is an unheralded, really great feature of all the OSs, where you can save your passwords. They sync via iCloud. They're available on all your devices. You don't have to write them down in a book. It's really nice. You can now share them. So if you've got a partner, whether it's a spouse or a business partner, a child, whatever it is, you can share passwords with them. You can say, share this password with this person, and it will securely share that password so you can both use it. That's super helpful. My wife and I have a lot of bank logins. My kids and I have a lot of streaming service logins. It's stuff like that. Messages is getting a lot better. You can swipe to reply really quickly, which is nice. There's a button to scroll back up. If you've got a very busy group chat, scroll back up to the last message you read, and so you can scroll down from there, which is really nice. It's easier to insert a photo or take a picture from messages on iPhone and iPad. It used to be kind of confusing where you're in the iMessage apps and stuff, and it's a lot simpler now to do that. I'm a big fan of tapbacks. I always get frustrated that there are only 5 of them. They've upgraded stickers in messages, but one of the things they've done is that any sticker can be a tap back, and every emoji is a sticker now. So basically, you can tap back with anything. I think that's great. I got tired of everything being a haha or a thumbs up, and this is better. A lot of PDF upgrades. They're using machine learning to detect when a PDF or even an image of a form on a piece of paper is a form to be filled out, and I've had this happen where somebody sends me a PDF and says, oh, fill this out. And it's a completely flat PDF. And like, what am I going to open like a little text box on each one? In the fall, Apple system is smart enough to say, oh, this looks like a form. And it will actually put text fill in all of them. It'll offer autofill, let you save it back out and send it back to them. It's a little thing, but I think it's great. And also you'll be able to put PDFs in notes and share them with friends and jointly mark them up, which I actually, have in the past year tried to do that with Freeform, to do like puzzles with a friend of mine on the East Coast, where we're looking at a shared piece of paper, essentially, and an Apple Pencil, and trying to work out a puzzle. And it didn't work very well in Freeform, but I'm excited because Apple says, yes, it will work really well in Notes. Some other things that are coming to Notes, which is, I think, a great app. You can link to other notes, which is cool. So you can say, this is over in that other note, and you tap on it and it takes you to the other note. So your notes can kind of like hyperlink between themselves. They've changed autocorrect. They're throwing out the old autocorrect system, which was very frustrating to lots of people, including me. They're using a transformer model. If you've heard of ChatGPT, the T in ChatGPT is transformer. The idea here is that this is a text model that Apple's using to intuit what word you're typing, what sentence you might be typing, and it shows that in gray after your text entry cursor. And if it shows you what the right thing, you just tap the space bar and it fills it in. So it should save time and also be more accurate. But again, they said that the last time they overhauled autocorrect and it didn't work. So I'll believe it when I see it. But it sounds like this is much newer technology that is much better at this thing. And my favorite feature of this is I am so tired of typing the right word and having autocorrect make it the wrong word. Mm-hmm. This will, the new versions of the OS will underline those autocorrects, and if you tap on them, it'll give you the option of going back and reverting to the word you actually typed. Finally, Health app is coming to the iPad. In Photos, they've overhauled the face recognition engine, so it should be more accurate in detecting faces and saying this is all the photos we have of this person and that person. That's really great. They'll also detect dogs and cats. So instead of having to see like all photos of cats, you can say, no, I want all the photos of this particular cat, and it will actually work, which as somebody who has had many cats and dogs over the years, I am happy about. And then very quickly, macOS is adding, among many other things, Notification Center is currently where widgets live. You will be able to put widgets on the desktop instead. I like widgets. I don't like them on the Mac because I never look in Notification Center. I'm looking forward to having them on the desktop. They will also stream from your phone, which is a pretty wild idea. It uses AirDrop and continuity features. Basically, if you've got a widget on an iPhone app and you want to see it on your Mac, you can, and it just works, which is a pretty wild idea. If you use webcams a lot, like we're using here, Apple is finally going to let you control the zoom and pan of your webcam. So if you're always sort of like your ideal webcam view, you're kind of back here and off to the side, you'll actually be able to say, no, zoom in on that part, pan over. That's what I want. Manually, not via center stage. You will be able to do that in macOS Sonoma, which is pretty great. I'll just mention, there's a really cute feature called Call Sheet in iOS 17 that is like the custom lock screen interface, except you're creating a little card that appears when you call your friends. You choose it, you pick your picture, you pick your style, and if you're in their contacts when you call them, instead of a generic thing, you get this customized, personalized sort of greeting that it's you. If you get that from a friend and it's an ugly picture and you don't like it and you wish you never saw it again, you can just turn it off and say, I don't want to see that. And it won't let random people send you a picture. It's only people that you know. And I'll mention one more feature of iOS, which is this very clever voicemail feature where you can see a call is coming in and there's a button to send it to voicemail. When you tap that button, it does not do what currently happens when you send something to voicemail, which is send it to your carrier. Instead, your phone answers the call, plays your voicemail, listens for the response, transcribes it on the lock screen so you can see who's calling and what they're saying. And if you decide, oh, I actually want to talk to that person, you tap a button and you pick it up and you talk to them. And this is all happening on your device, doesn't require support from your carrier. And if you don't do that, then at the end of the message, they hang up and it saves it to your voicemail and it's just a regular voicemail. But I am excited about this feature because that happens all the time. I don't want to answer calls from people I don't know. And then it turns out it's the plumber I've been trying to get hold of for a week. And he finally called me back and I missed it. And I'm never going to reach him again. And instead I can see that and just pick it up and say, oh, hey, I'm here. So sort of like what we used to do with answering machines. It's back. And then there are a bunch of watchOS features that I'll just say there are widgets on watchOS now, and I think Apple Watch is going to get a lot more functional because you'll be able to use the digital crown to scroll down off of your watch face and see a bunch of widgets that are living right below, full of good stuff that you can see. So I think the watch interface is going to be a lot simpler and more usable. With that, I'm going to stop talking. I could go on and on and on, but if we have questions about Macs or OS updates, I've got you. You've got me for as long as you want me until you kick me out.
All right, great. We're going to start off with Dan. Dan, you have a question for Jason. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
I was just curious if you're going to be purchasing the Vision Pro.
Well, I mean, it is my job, so
Personal.
Yes. But if and it's hard to do theoretical things, but I'm in this business because I am a tech enthusiast as well. I bought a MetaQuest 2, and the only reason I didn't buy a MetaQuest Pro is, well, one, the reviews weren't very good, and two, I was sort of hoping that Apple would do something. So as a person in Apple platforms, I would probably buy it anyway, but I will definitely buy one because I want to write about it and talk about the experience of using it. I'm actually tempted to buy a MetaQuest Pro now just so I have something to compare it to. Yeah. But that's like $1,000, and like, do I really? I should save that money for the very expensive Apple Vision Pro instead. But having been through the demo, I was like, oh yeah, this is good, right? Like, I think that helped a lot. My realization that this was not some sort of like, it's got a lot of rough edges. Like, if we're 6 months out and it's this polished, I'm feeling pretty good about where they're going to end up. But I'll tell you this, if I get a review unit, I will use that first. And then that will be that happens with me a lot. If I get to review it, which is what a luxury. I get to try it out, form an opinion about it, send that back to Apple, and then decide, do I want to buy this? The danger is I bought a M1 Mac Studio and an M2 MacBook Air last year because I reviewed both of them and I was like, oh yeah, I gotta buy this one. So that happens.
All
It's
right.
a
Thank
business
you.
expense. It's all in the business. It's
Uh,
fine.
All right, Mr. Maciel, you're next.
Thank you, Cheetah. Quick
Mhm.
question. I've had this iMac for quite a while. It's a 2017 version. It works perfect. I've upgraded it over and over and over. It's on running Ventura 13.4. Will the new OS work with anything that old?
2017 iMac. I think Apple's made us, I don't have that in front of me. Apple has made a statement about the compatibility.
Okay.
It's on their macOS Sonoma page. The problem now is that okay, iMac 2019 and later, so no.
Okay.
I will say Apple is fairly committed for a couple versions back of the OS to do security updates, so those will continue for a while. The truth is, new features are starting to just not come to Intel. So that I don't know how long Intel Macs will be supported by macOS. It will probably be next year or the year after that they drop it entirely. But what's happened in the meantime is this sort of like long, slow fade away where there are features that they're like, yeah, that feature is just not on Intel. And sometimes it's because they're literally using the same code as on iOS and iPadOS. So it's Apple Silicon code. So having a system that's not on the latest version doesn't necessarily mean it's not perfectly usable, but that we are in that period where the Intel Macs are going to start to not be supported. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Tolper, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Jason. So I have an older 27-inch Intel. I love the size of the screen.
Yeah.
Do you think that they're anytime soon are going to come out with a 27-inch iMac, or am I just stuck having to buy in some separate monitor?
Soon is the word you said. I'm just going to say soon, probably not. So Mark Gurman at Bloomberg is, I think, the person with the best inside Apple sources on the planet. And Mark said that they have talked about doing a 27-inch or successor for the 27-inch. It might be larger because, they might do that to the 27-inch iMac, but that they haven't done it yet. And I think the fact that they didn't update the iMac regular for M1, and that's probably an M3 product, that suggests to me that if there is a larger iMac coming, like Mark says, it's not something they're currently working on. So it's possible that next year they would do an M3 iMac and put it in two sizes. It's certainly possible. It's also possible that if it happens at all, it will happen later. I guess my question is, only Apple knows how well the two different size models sell. And Apple doesn't, it's not as big a priority for Apple because they've got the Studio Display and they've got the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio. And I think what they would tell you is, if you really love the 27-inch display, you should buy a Studio Display and a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio. Now, the positive thing about that is you could keep displays last forever, right? So you could buy it. That 20 is, I have one right here. I have in the corner, I have an iMac Pro that I used with, and it's the same panel on this one as it is on that one, right? The 27-inch iMac panel is what's in the Studio Display. So it would be just the same, except you'd have a little external Mac living on your desk or under your desk. I see the appeal of the all-in-one. Also, the Studio Display, I mean, honestly, it's using the same, more or less the same panel. It's slightly updated, but it's like the same panel as the original 5K iMac. It doesn't have HDR. It doesn't have ProMotion. There may be another display coming that will be a little more expensive. That'll be a lot nicer. So I think that's part of the equation too. But yeah, in the short term, I'd say if you need to buy a Mac in the next year, I don't look, if you can wait until the new iMac comes out, which should happen sometime next year, we'll probably, like, if there's no bigger iMac then there's not going to be for a couple of years, I think. is my guess, but it's unclear. It's possible that next year they would do it. I think it's more likely it would be the year after, but there's also a possibility they will never do it because they'll say, if you want a bigger display, just buy an external display and a Mac Studio or a Mac Mini. So
which one would you recommend for a non-Apple display as far as 27-inch?
I think the Studio Display is really good. I've heard you can get other non-Apple displays. They are not as nice,
Okay.
but they are often cheaper. LG makes one that all my friends are podcasters. It's the extra fine, or as they say extra fine, right? Like it's okay, but it's not great. It's the same panel. LG makes the panel. I'm happy with my purchase of the Studio Display. I know it's not HDR, it's not ProMotion. They may make I'll say they may make a new version of this display. It will be more expensive than this display. I will tell you that. So I that's what I did. I'll say that. I am a 27-inch iMac user until last year for the previous 7 years. I had a 5K iMac and then I bought an iMac Pro. And last year I bought a Mac Studio and a Studio Display. I just decided, and when I update, I'm not going to buy the M2 because the difference between M1 and 2 is not enough, I think, for people to just jump from M1 to M2 if everything else is the same and the Mac Studio is identical otherwise. But if there was an M3 Mac Studio or something like that, the beauty of it is I could just buy that and slot it in. So the initial price is higher, but ongoing, you only have to buy the computer again and not the display. And you can maybe even put, if it's a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio, put it to use somewhere else in your house or something like that. So that's what I did, but everybody's choices are going to be different. That little iMac is great. It's just, it's a 24-inch screen. So
Thank you.
That's not good enough, then it's not good enough.
All right, thank you, Michael. Alan, you're next. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Alan?
Is that Alan Weinstein you're referring to?
Yes, Alan, yes.
Okay, well, back on the thing that goes over your head. I mean, it's $3,400. As I remember it, the iPhone was close to 4,000 when it first came out, and now it's hundreds instead of thousands. So it probably over time, this fancy thing, which is thousands, will eventually become hundreds. So, I mean, it followed the same path as the iPhone followed, right?
Well, the iPhone price wasn't that high. It was $599, but at the time, every other phone was free, and they did cut it afterward. But I think the better example that I've been using is the original Mac cost $2,495 in 1984, which is about $7,000 today. And I think the pricing of this thing is taking people aback because I think we don't know how good we have it in terms of what computers cost now and phones and iPads. When it was the early days of computers in the late 70s and early 80s, they were really expensive. And back then the dollar went further than it did now. So I would say that Vision Pro's price, yes, it is partly, I think, because Apple knows it can't sell very many of them because it can't make very many of them. But it is also a throwback to an earlier era where you've got a cutting edge product and it's not able to take it down in price yet. And I agree. I think over time it will get cheaper. How much cheaper? I don't know. I mean, it may be quite a while before we see a $500 headset from Apple, but I'm sure they want to get there. But yes, if you compare it to a bunch of early computers, you could make the argument that, if you wanted to be the first one on your block to have a Mac, you're paying $8,000 in today's dollars. It's absolutely true. And we've just gotten used to the fact that our computers are relatively speaking a lot cheaper than they were back then. So yeah, it's a high price, higher than a lot of consumer electronics. I think it will come down over time, but that's how I would probably put it, is that you're buying into cutting edge of a brand new technology category. And of course it's expensive because of the stuff I listed at the beginning, the stuff that's in there. There's a lot. I mean, trust me, this thing didn't cost $800 to make. It cost thousands of dollars, each one of them, to just make it. So its price is understandable, even if it's not great. Like if you wanted, I get it. All of us would love this product that we desire if you do desire it to be a lot cheaper, but I also understand why it is what it is.
And I do remember the $10,000 FX that I was a hair away from buying.
I know, right? It was so fast,
Yeah.
but it was so
Yes.
expensive. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Alan, you did have a question about a microphone for the Mac Mini?
Yes, I'm listening to you on a Mac Mini with an external display, a Samsung. I think it's about 24-inch, and it's good enough. I mean, I see you fine. However, the microphone on the Mac Mini is often, kind of slurred or not really clear. Do you use the microphone in the Mac Mini, or do you have an external microphone that you listen through and not through the Mac Mini's microphone?
I use an extra, well, so I microphone, I'm a podcaster, so I have lots of microphones, but yeah, you can get, I mean, that's the beauty of it, is that there are cheap USB microphones out there you can get. I don't use the onboard. It doesn't, the laptop microphones sound a lot better than they used to. The compact Macs don't sound great. They just don't. Some displays have microphones in them. Those can be better. I don't know if yours does or if it recognizes it, but you can also just buy, remember Apple used to sell like a little external microphone you could stick somewhere. And there's I believe the Mac Mini even has a mic jack, so you could potentially even use like a non-USB mic and it would probably work. But no, maybe it doesn't. Anyway, I would say there are a lot of if you're really having audio issues, look for a fairly low-cost USB microphone. There are lots of them now that there are podcasts. There are a lot of microphones out there, and they're
and you
pretty
just
easy to
stick
use.
this USB microphone into one of the USB ports in the Mac Mini, and
and it'll work just fine. Yeah, that's. I am coming to you from a microphone attached to USB, and it works great.
Okay, thank you.
What is the microphone you're using, Jason?
I'm using a Shure SM7B, which is a classic radio mic. It's expensive and it's kind of hard to drive, and I don't recommend it to anybody. Audio Technica makes, this is my podcast choice, but there's Audio Technica makes a mic called the ATR 2100, which is, let me see if I can find it here on my website. It's a Audio Technica ATR 2100. That is the one that I recommend to beginning podcasters. If it's like $100 ish. There are cheaper ones that are fine, especially if you're not doing a podcast, you just want to be heard more clearly. Blue Snowball is the first microphone I use. I think it's like $50. If all you look, there are a lot of microphones out there. If all you want to do is be heard, find a USB microphone that's in your budget, and you'll be fine. Like there are lots of them now.
All right, great. Thank you.
When I started, there
weren't. Tom Durkin, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, yeah, I have a Apple Thunderbolt display I love, and I'm worried that I won't be able to use it in the future. I went to the Apple store and they told me I couldn't use it with a Mac Studio. I don't know if that's true. He said I needed it's the wrong version of Thunderbolt. Is that true? Is it sort of a dead end product now, or what?
Thunderbolt display. I used to have one of those too.
I love the display. I'm watching right now. It's a wonderful display.
Yeah.
I'm using a Thunderbolt display on my MacBook Pro M1.
Okay.
Works.
I think it's got. I think what you have to do is it connects via DisplayPort. So you have
an adapter.
There's an adapter.
It works flawlessly, and I'll go with what Jason said. This Thunderbolt monitor is years old, and I just upgraded my computer, and I'm still using that Thunderbolt monitor, and it works fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
You have to plug it directly into the computer. It won't work through a Thunderbolt hub. It works great.
So okay. So how do you usually use it through?
I'd say
you buy a little adapter, Thunderbolt adapter, like Jason was talking about.
You and Dan can connect, and he can tell you what he bought.
Yep.
But that's because the Thunderbolt changed, but what it's really doing is just emulating DisplayPort, so you can adapt it and make it work.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tom. All right, do we have any more questions for Jason? We still have time for maybe one or two more. Anyone? Okay.
Well,
Well,
I did
go
have
ahead.
in the chat, there were a couple, somebody asked about Chris Breen, who I used to work with. He works at Apple now. So many, I'll tell you this tidbit. So many people I used to work with at Macworld work at Apple now. Dan Frakes works in Mac App Store editorial. He is an editor for all of the stories they do on the Mac App Store and highlighting Mac apps. Jim Galbraith, who is our lab director at Macworld, is in the performance marketing group with multiple people from the old Macworld and Mac user labs. Whenever Apple claims that something is 2 times faster, or they show bar charts of like 60% faster or all of that, all of those claims are based on real testing that they do. And the people who are doing it, I like to think it's basically the Macworld lab. They're all inside Apple now. It's pretty cool. Chris Breen writes for Apple. He writes a bunch of like how-tos and stuff on Apple's website. Serenity Caldwell is in developer relations. And the list actually does go on. John Seff works at Apple University. There's just we ended up after the big layoffs at Macworld over the course of many years, a lot of those people ended up sort of behind the curtain, where every time I go down to Cupertino, it's like you want to have lunch, you want to say hi, and it's really kind of great. So those people, obviously they can't be out in public as Apple people. That's not their role anymore, but they're all a lot of those names that you might remember from back in the day at Macworld are still kicking around, a lot of them inside Apple, and then a few of us outside Apple. So that was a fun question. Thank you for asking.
All right, Ward Clark, you want to throw your question in before we leave today?
Lay it on me.
Ward, open your mic. Go ahead.
I've heard of folks using hacks to the Mac OS installers, so they'll install software on a machine that isn't supported.
I have a friend who does that. It's fine. I think what happens is try it and see if it works. I think a lot of incompatibility doesn't come from Apple saying, "Oh no, this doesn't work." It becomes either it failed a certain test, it was unreliable enough that they didn't like it, or in some cases it's that some configuration doesn't work with it, and rather than fix it, they just lock it out and say we're just not going to bother. And so what ends up happening historically, I don't know about this version, we'll see, but what ends up happening historically, and my friend Chip does this, or I think maybe you got a new Mac finally, but he did this all the time. So hi to Chip. Shout out to Chip. If it runs, it runs. Like, and I think that's the experiment you have to do, is like, if I can buy it or not buy, I can download a patch that lets me run the installer and it runs, and then I boot and it actually works. I think you're past the worst of it. I mean, I would have a backup, and I would be very careful about that. But yes, running an unsupported version on older hardware, generally it's unsupported because of an esoteric Apple reason that might not affect your particular computer. And if that's the case, then run it. I mean, like I said, Chip's been running unsupported OSs for a couple of years now, and it's worked fine. Also, Fred asked in the chat, and I'll just throw out there. He said, "Does that cube run this cube with that monitor?" In fact, yes. The all these computers that you see here boot. I have a Mac Portable right behind my head. It does not boot, but the rest of them do. And that 128, if you've got an old 512 128 or a Plus laying around, or actually any old computer, one of the problems is probably the hard drive or the floppy disks. There's hardware. It's like a quick bonus tip. This little thing that's sitting on the keyboard here is called the floppy emu. It attaches to the floppy port of the Mac, original Mac. And it's like a little computer with an SD card in it, and you can put disk images on it from the internet, and literally you can boot any disk ever from that era just by selecting it, and it boots off of an SD card. And then there's a similar thing called Blue SCSI that will attach to a SCSI port, and you put an SD card in it with disk images, and you don't need a hard drive. You don't need a functional hard drive to boot those computers. So some of these are booting off their hard drives, but at the very least, this one here is booting off of an SD card, because I don't have any 400K floppies to put in it. So that's my retro Mac story. They work, except for the Mac Portable, which I couldn't have afforded it if it worked. So
wonderful. Jason, I want to thank you so much once again for a very enthusiastic presentation. You've got a lot of people excited in the chat. You're going to cost a lot of people money.
Sorry about that.
Including myself. But everyone, can you please unmute yourself and thank Jason?
Thank you.
Excellent presentation,
This
Jason.
was
Thank you,
great,
Jason.
very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Very nicely done.
Thank you, Jason.
It
Very
cost me money though.
Yeah.
go, Jason.
Wait for the reviews. Wait for the reviews. We'll see what the it's 6 months away.
MacBook
They're not
Air
done yet.
15-inch.
Oh yeah, well yeah, that one's great. You should just buy that.
An
What, that 15
intelligent
inch?
teenager.
Spend that.
All right, Dan, I'm handing it over to you.
All right. Thanks again, Jason. And if you like what Jason had to say here, check out his site, sixcolors.com. He has a membership site there and it's great articles. I follow him on Twitter and just really good stuff. So if you want to help support Jason, check out sixcolors.com. Next week, we have Christian Boyce talking to us about automation. So you won't want to miss that. And everyone have a good weekend and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Bye.
Be well.
It's done.
I'll end the meeting now. Thank you.